a member of the city's Historic Preservation Commission. Good morning, Julia.
Good morning.
We're also joined by City Municipal Code Compliance Division Chief Thomas Register. Good morning.
Good morning.
And Realtor and Historic Real Estate Expert Chrissy Cudd. Good morning, Chrissy.
Hi.
So, Julia, let's just start out. What is demolition by neglect?
Demolition by neglect is basically where you have a structure and you put off all maintenance and even in some cases inhabitants within that structure in the effort to be able to eventually demolish a building. Within this case, historic buildings are should be extremely hard to demolish because of their distinction. And one of the ways that you're able to demolish them is to prove that they're beyond repair. So once you insert neglect over decades, a building becomes beyond repair and it's allowed to be demolished.
Is the understanding of demolition by neglect that it is deliberate?
It is for the most part the understanding that there is some thought there that it's very expensive to restore historic structures appropriately within the historic districts. There's rules and regulations that you have to follow when you restore them, and that again adds to the cost versus doing new work. So it is expensive to do, and so the thought is in some cases that people would neglect it and demolish it and be able to build something new that might be easier to get through permitting because it doesn't require all the historic requirements and it be a little bit more friendly to the pocketbook because it's new construction.
So we mentioned that you serve on the Historic Preservation Commission. What is the role of that city commission, and why was this task force deemed necessary by the members of the commission?
The Historic Commission was put into place in the time where some of our historic districts were brought about. Riverside, Avondale, Springfield, downtown is a historic district now. Um, and our job is as volunteers is to read through the requirements in the municipal code and be able to apply our experience to look at a project that comes before us and be able to decide if what they want to do meets the requirements of the code.
And as members of the commission, at some point said we need to take a closer look at this issue of demolition by neglect.
Yes, there's a few other things that the commission can do. One of which is creating task force, where we see that there's a need within the city for an issue within the historic districts. And I've been on the commission for a few years now and seen many buildings that have come before us that have sat for 10, 20 years with nothing happening in them. And eventually somebody comes and says, hey, we need to demolish this. It's beyond repair. And seeing that over and over again made us realize that we needed to take a look at that and figure out what we could do and what we could recommend. We have the ability to create task forces and subcommittees and even landmark buildings. And so we thought that this was the best way for us to take a stab at finding a solution to this problem.
So, Thomas, we noted that you are the Code Compliance Division Chief. Can you tell us what is the job of code compliance and what kind of recommendations are you making to the city, or did you make to the city's task force?
We enforce property safety and maintenance codes, zoning codes, and code enforcement also does the monitoring and maintenance of the certificates of appropriateness for historic buildings. So we pretty much make sure that blight stays out of the community and that actions on a building don't get to the point to where it's neglected far enough for it to become or need demolition.
Is a certificate of appropriateness, is that in order to do any kind of construction on a historic building, or is that in order to demolish a historic building?
For both, they would need approval through the commission to demolish the building or to do any type of repairs to make sure that they're repairing it in accordance with the historic ordinances.
And so, in your presentations to the task force, what was it that you were asking for? What were the priorities from the code compliance field?
Our priorities were community engagement, letting the community know that we need their assistance. We need them to tell us what's going on in their community. In many of the historic districts, there's alleyways, there's areas that we don't see, and we don't see exactly what's going on a property. and they may have that access that we don't, and to notify us of it. Outside of the engagement, we would like to see. Um, we would prefer to spend our resources maybe temporarily weatherizing properties or contributing to the community in some ways other than just cleanup and demolition, and using funds to prevent it from getting to the point to where it needs to be demolished, or that it gets to the point to where there's no other option but to either remove it and start fresh or
Yeah.
to get for it.
And since Chrissy, you see these properties, you often are in the business of buying and selling these properties. I'm guessing that they present some unique challenges, both for people who are in the real estate business, but also for the neighborhood around it. Can you kind of talk about how historic buildings within a historic district, what role they play, and what what kind of obstacles you see to, buying, selling, and preserving these homes?
The ordinances that were referenced are something that a lot of people are unaware of. And so a lot of flippers come along and they think, ooh, a good price. And they don't look at any of the details. They don't know any of the details. They don't care about any of the details. They're hoping sometimes they can flip it with doing nothing to the property, or they're hoping that it will eventually fall down and they can build something that they see as more profitable. And a lot of buyers are not versed in any of this. So they come in. Sometimes the investors have done some lipstick on a pig, not really restored it properly. They're just, and sometimes it hurts property sales because you may not want to live next to a vacant building that you see people coming and going from. It's contributed to, for a long time, the lack of business on Main Street because people didn't want to commit to businesses if they were surrounded by a bunch of vacant homes. They didn't see that as a good business model.
What are the challenges when people are looking at buying? If you have a property for sale that is a historic property but is in some disrepair, what do you tell people who are prospective buyers?
They need to start with an inspector that actually understands historic properties. You get somebody who's never inspected a historic property, they don't know what they're looking at. So they're going to give probably bad information to the buyer. But you get somebody who's experienced, they know what to look for, and they'll recognize that in this kind of home, that probably was a load bearing wall at one point. Why is that missing? And little things like that.
Little things. Yeah, that seems like an important consideration. If you're just joining us, we are talking about a new task force report. It actually has 19 recommendations about ways to improve the city's processes for stopping demolition by neglect. You can join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. What about this do we I mean, people, not everybody lives in a historic district, Julia, and not everybody understands the value of them. Why should people who live in Mandarin or Bay Meadows or the beaches care about historic preservation in these historic districts?
Because it's part of the history and the fabric of the city. You can live out. We in Jacksonville we live away from St. Augustine, but St. Augustine's such a historic gem that we all care about that and we like to visit it and everything. And it's wonderful to maintain that type of history within our own city, so that you can go on the weekend and walk through the shops, walk through the neighborhood, see some of the historic home tours that are offered in all of our neighborhoods, and keeping it's also really great as well because even a few years ago, Riverside Avondale was earmarked as one of the best neighborhoods to live in the United States because of that. And so that helps Jacksonville with its image across America. It makes people think, hey, maybe I want to move to Jacksonville because they have this wonderful gem of a neighborhood.
So these are resources, that are part of our story as a community. Um, but Thomas, what do we know about cycles of deterioration or cycles of decay? What happens to a neighborhood when you start to see properties fall into this cycle of demolition by neglect?
I'm not sure I have the extensive experience to know exactly what happens to a neighborhood that are meeting all of this criteria, but what I've seen in the 11 years I've been working for the city, places like Springfield or other historic areas that have been allowed to be neglected or that have gone on many years with neglect. You see many blocks with vacant lots, and I think someone said something about breaking into to vacant properties, and oftentimes during the colder months, people go in to get warm and they burn down these properties. So you see these beautiful, vibrant neighborhoods get reduced down to vacant lots or unmaintained buildings that the city constantly has to go back in and maintain and cut the grass and clean it up and try to prevent further decay in that neighborhood.
So for folks who are watching our live stream, we do have some images we've been showing of kind of before and after of homes, but there is a photograph that we also have from the Jackson, the publication, that shows the city overview of historic structures as they once were, and then a screen right next to it that shows how many of those have been removed. And it is a pretty dramatic rendering. What what explains that?
I think a lot of it really is it just seems a lot easier to take a building down and put what you want to do there. If there's a historic structure that doesn't meet the programming criteria of the ownership, it's a lot easier for them to take something down and put what is going to economically work for them there, or what's going to work for the needs of the site.
What do we know about the pace of demolition requests, Thomas? I know that the task force report got into kind of, how many demolition permits, how many demolition reviews are coming before the city, and your own staff, documenting the increase in certificate of appropriateness applications.
The COAs for demolition go through the historic preservation and planning department, not municipal code compliance. For code compliance, we try not to demolish historic structures when we can avoid it. Outside of emergencies or collapsing buildings. So, the planning and historic would have to comment on the the increase or influx of those COAs.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought the task force report said that the staff documented a roughly 20% increase in COA applications between 23 and 24.
The Planning and Historic Preservation Committee.
Gotcha. Okay. So that would be a significant increase, though. Is that something that you see reflected in the field, Chrissy?
It's actually a little better in Springfield than it used to be because it makes more economic sense now to restore the properties. There was a property on Pearl back years ago that was owned by an investor that had come in and just bought a bunch of tax deeds or whatever. And this house sat for years. There were vines growing through the roof and outside the window openings, and there was nothing inside. It was just studs. And it was one of the ones that the neighbors went to the city and protested because it was up for demolition. And it sold last year for 450 and was on the home tour this weekend.
Wow. So that is a success story.
Yeah.
What do we know about methods that don't work? And I don't know which of you wants to take this, but I'm thinking specifically of fines and liens against properties that have been deemed, you know, in some state of blight and in need of serious repair. Obviously, the city can issue those fines, they can issue those liens, but they haven't proven terribly effective. The city has not collected most of that money. Thomas.
It's hard to gauge why it's not effective. The fines can prompt a property owner to come into compliance, and we have policies that reduce these fines to make it make sense for them to invest money and to bring these properties back up to code. But in some instances, those policies can be used with loopholes to get past them and bypass some of the fines, or an investor may choose to sit on a property and not do the maintenance, allow the fines to accrue, and then use the policies to have the fines negated when they sell it, or other various methods to have the policy used to reduce those fines. So it's it can work as long as there's a next step, and sometimes that next step may be judicial action leading, maybe even up to foreclosure, so that if the city has steps in place to do something with that property as opposed to, leaving it on the city's
And the city has
inventory.
been reluctant, I guess, to use foreclosure. I think that the task force noted that the last time that it used that tool was with the Bostwick building, which is the Cowford Chop House now back in 2016. Although I understand there's something that is sort of in the works with the Laura Street trio.
Yes, I that's one of the things I think that's most important about the task force was identifying. One of the things that we actually did that was really important is we looked at about a dozen other cities that have a demolition by neglect task force that they've put together and their cities have implemented. And we were able to learn through what was working in other cities to use for our recommendations here. And I think that identifying even this sort of large scope of buildings that exist within our historic districts that have fallen into neglect and let the city know that this is an issue, kind of bring it to the forefront, gives the city a little bit more of understanding instead of letting something sit for 10, 15 years. In some cases, we saw a structure that came in front of the commission last year that had sat for almost 20 years, abandoned. And so I think it brings it to light as an issue. And if, whatever administration, the administration now, any moving forward, know that it's something they need to take a look at instead of, oh, eventually, hopefully this person will pay this. You can, as you said earlier, give it a little bit more teeth to the situation. And hopefully moving forward, we won't run into this issue as much.
One of the calculations that your task force did was, kind of breaking down the fines issued in historic districts since 1998, and it was really astonishing. You found $196 million in fines were issued
Hmm.
in those districts in that time, and only less than half a million ever paid. So 0.22%, which was a really surprisingly low amount. Was that surprising to you?
Yes, that was extremely surprising to me. I was surprised to see the number that had been issued, and then even more surprised to see how little had been paid. But I think Thomas sort of spoke to that as there are loopholes, there are ways for when a building is eventually sold, a site is eventually sold to say, hey, let's get rid of some of these fines so that hopefully somebody can do something better here than have a condemned abandoned building, a building that has such neglect that it needs to be torn down. So I think that that is what happens in the most part, and that's why we see a lot of these structures coming to us that need to be demolished is because they've gone on far too long and they've been sold to somebody else. Somebody wants to repair them. They figure out how much it costs to actually repair it. They figure out the actual condition of the structure and they say, listen, this is beyond repair now. And all of those liens were sort of waived in the process, thinking, okay, well, this person will fix this site, and eventually get they'll do something there. It might not be restoring a historic building; it might be a new structure. But our goal for the commission is to be able to identify these earlier and give recommendations to the city so that we can find a building that maybe has been in neglect for a couple of years and not 10, 15 years so that we can still save that structure.
We've got a call from JD in San Marco. Good morning, JD. Go ahead.
Good morning. What I want to talk about here is there's a nonprofit corporation, it's a Georgia corporation, that actually can facilitate an industrial revenue bond for any nonprofit in Duval County that wants to buy these properties, rehab these properties, especially in the historical area. The first one that comes to mind to me is the old school building under I-10 and 95 interchange.
The
That
Annie
building
Lytle.
needs to be
Yeah.
picked up, spun around. Yeah, I think it's school building 2 or 4. I don't remember. But that building needs to be picked up, spun around, put back down, and completely That's an absolutely beautiful building. I believe it might actually be an old Clouseau building. I don't know for sure, but it looks like something Clouseau would have been the architect. But the point being is this nonprofit corporation can, if you have a nonprofit corporation that wants to do this kind of work, they can facilitate up to $10 million, and it's easy to qualify if the nonprofit corporation is at least 3 years old. But there's a website that they can go to and read about it.
Thanks, JD. Appreciate the call. I mean, relative to the Annie Lytle building that he mentioned, that's kind of sandwiched between some overpasses now. Um, Tom on Facebook writes, aside from intent and historical quality, The city of Jacksonville is a frequent practitioner of destruction by neglect. The old courthouse, the old JEA building, and the current city jail are all buildings that fit that description. I would, though, put the old JEA headquarters with its rotating restaurant on top in the category of historic buildings. I think, unfortunately, that restaurant is no longer there and rotating, but it is a very, classic kind of old building. And there have been a number of buildings that the city has owned that have been lost to time. How does the city, you know, take on this challenge, represent and sort of model for homeowners when it's got its own set of issues when it comes to trying to keep its own historic stock in place? Thomas, thoughts? Julia?
That's it's a tricky question for sure. I think that what I'm hoping is with this task force and a little bit more interest within the historic preservation of the city, that the city can realize that these structures, they're one of a kind. They're part of Jacksonville. These buildings. There's no buildings like them anywhere else. So it's important for our city to maintain them, and other cities do that. They take a hit, they take a loss, and because it's important, they've identified that that's part of their culture, that's part of the fabric of the city. And to be able to move forward and distinguish, we're going to do this, we're going to go all in and change this part of the city by restoring this is just something that I think needs a little bit more oomph in Jacksonville.
Chrissy, we talked about, people buying homes, perhaps looking to flip them. How often are people buying homes without realizing that they're in a historic district? I know that one of the task force recommendations addresses that, trying to send out annual notifications to homeowners or property residents, at least that say, like, you're living in a historic district. It comes with these certain obligations.
There's a problem within my own industry about a lack of training for this as a component of real estate. There's also no form requiring that a seller notify a buyer that the home is in a historic district.
Really?
And if you go to the property tax records on their site, it shows a historic designation. But unfortunately, the vendor that the MLS uses to link to for tax records leaves that field off. So many times realtors look up the tax records through the MLS, don't see a historic designation. They just see a cool looking house. And we've heard all kinds of things being told to people about alleys and easements and what you can and can't do. And it is to a certain extent to blame in our industry for not providing better training and requirements.
The question of beyond repair, too. First of all,
There's nothing beyond repair.
okay. Well, that's good to know. I mean, I was going to ask, when people are making that determination, is that just sort of beyond what their pocketbook can tolerate? Who's making those determinations? I mean, I think that's also something the task force was looking at.
I think the city looks at it from a safety standpoint a lot of times. And during the recession, the city had even less funds than they do now. So there was an emphasis on demolition. And we fought a lot of battles that we lost. But the citizens of Springfield, the neighbors, we take our neighborhood very seriously. And we will go to the mattresses with anybody over these issues. And when you say demolition, them's fighting words to us.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to see anything because we have seen examples of homes restored that nobody thought could be saved, and they were.
Yeah.
And we want to see these houses turned into homes.
And the pictures that we've been showing during this, I believe that you all, some of them are included in the task force. They really do show that because they are just wrecks
Mhm.
before, and they're just
Mhm.
stunning buildings that have been rehabbed after. Thomas, I wanted to ask you, one of the recommendations of the task force is the idea that some of these liens and fines would be rolled into the ad valorem taxes of property owners. And I know that you spoke about Springfield and its advocacy, the Springfield Restoration and Preservation, SPAR,
Spark.
also advocated for that, for trying to roll some of these fines into a way that would annually be enforced and paid. Is that something that you think is likely to happen, that recommendation? And why was that something that you were advocating for?
I think if the property owner, if they're choosing to be negligent, I think it may prompt them if they see that bill on their tax roll to do something about it, whether that's pay that bill or come in and mow the property and clean it up and keep it secured and provide routine maintenance. I think it's important for them to see that if they are allowed to sit quietly in whatever city they reside in and get their yearly tax bill and not do any proactive maintenance on their property and not see what action the city is taking outside of the enforcement letters that they may receive, maybe that'll prompt them to do something, and it'll certainly prompt, I believe, the real estate agents when they're doing their research and they see these amount of liens that they don't have to go searching for with code enforcement or with the city tax collector. It's now listed
Mhm.
on the tax bill, and you can see all of these itemized. So I think it's just important to have that in the owner's face, for lack of a better word.
Are you optimistic that that's one of the recommendations of the task force that will be embraced by the city, by this administration?
I think everybody that we've encountered in response to this task force has been supportive. So it's one of the positive changes I could see the city moving forward with.
Another recommendation that I thought was interesting would basically apply some civil penalties if there is a property that has to be demolished, or it has to be relocated because the owner has failed to maintain it. So that would be sort of in addition to the costs incurred by the city for the demolition and whatever that cost, there'd be the civil penalty of 30% of the market value of the property, nothing less than a $10,000. So that would be a minimum cost. And then they'd also be limited on a certificate of appropriateness. So again, they couldn't modify the property, they couldn't demolish the property for at least a year. Um, Julie, how do you think that figures into this list of 19 recommendations? And again, what's the appetite for that at the city?
Um, I I haven't had conversations with the city specifically about the appetite there, but to me, if you're going to make the investment of purchasing a structure within a historic district where the municipal code requires you to not only maintain it, but if you want to do something to it, do it appropriately with the historic fabric of that neighborhood. If you're going to make that investment, then there needs to be some sort of consequence. That's a harsh word, but consequence if you're not going to do that or you never had the intention to do that. So to me, this is something that besides mounting up fines, that eventually one day you might be able to say, hey, I'm going to sell this to somebody else. And the city's like, thank God you haven't been doing anything with it for a decade. So we're just going to get rid of these. To me, it's something that gives it, again, a little bit more teeth in keeping our buildings safe.
Yeah. The districts that you all are focused on are the historic districts. That leaves out a lot of properties in the city of Jacksonville. What protections are in place for them for maintaining historic buildings in non-designated historic districts?
So we have like you said, we have a few historic districts. There are local historic districts and there are national historic districts, and those are the ones that our commission sort of go and review. On top of that, and it's one of the recommendations I believe, was to create a subcommittee to look at landmarking other buildings around the city. That aside from a neighborhood deciding to become a local historic district or a national historic district, that's really the only protection you can give a building that falls within that historic designation. A historic designation, there's about 9 points that the National Park Service has when landmarking a building. But one of the main things being at least 50 years old, you can start to look at whether it is a historic landmarkable building. And that's the only route to protect a structure that is not within any of our historic neighborhoods. It would be to landmark it.
Thomas, now that this report is done, what are next steps?
Our next steps are to coordinate and meet the criteria that the administration supports and that makes sense for the city, including coming up with uh, a matrix on how to identify these properties. If you look at the building that collapsed on Main Street recently, uh, if you look at the structure of that building, that it was about 20 years ago that the roof started giving way. The property was condemned, but because the city tries to leave it to the property owner and not take demolition authority over private buildings where they're otherwise kept up, it was allowed to get to this point. So if we can identify these and find solutions, including those additional fines, or there's an ordinance in the Florida Senate right now that also will impose fines for demolishing a structure without permits in a historic district. So hopefully that'll come. These are all tools to just prevent us from getting to that point to where we see something collapse, or where we see where the city does have to come in and take action. And it's not cheap for the city through code enforcement to take down a building through emergency action. It's a Some of them have been $120,000, and spending that money and those resources on temporary weatherization or shoring or other minor repairs, or utilizing the resources that are available through the housing division for those that may have low income ownership. They're all different tools that can help combat the neglect or the lack of attention on these historic structures.
Well, it's an interesting read. We're going to have a link to the task force report on our website. But we thank you all so much for being here. Julia Epstein, Thomas Register, Chrissy Cudd. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Up next, saving a historic Boy Scout headquarters in Atlantic Beach. Welcome back. Well, Atlantic Beach locals are fighting to save a storied Scout Troop headquarters. And here to tell us about it is Frank Tappan, former Troop 37 Scoutmaster in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Frank.
Good morning.
And Danielle Giovanucci, I think I've got, the troop's Youth Advancement Chair and Director of the fundraising effort. Good morning.
Thanks for having us, Ann.
How'd I do?
Wonderful.
Okay, great. So first of all, Frank, can you start just kind of what is the history of this building? What's so special about it?
Well, it was built the best we can figure in like 1938 to 1940, and it was built specifically for the Scout Troop 37.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few Boy Scout troops that have their own building. I mean, the building is owned by the church, but it was built for the Scout Troop.
You say by the church. Not everybody's familiar where this is and what it looks like. So where is it located?
The official address is 150 Sherry Drive, Atlantic Beach, Florida. The property's pretty good size, so the Scout Hut is actually behind the McDonald's. It's on Sturdivant.
It's around the corner, yeah.
It's around the corner. It's in the back part of the property.
Yeah. And this kind of walking inside of it is a different experience. It is, I mean, some of the wood on this interior, it's kind of an all wooden interior, was, I think, salvaged from another historic site. Can you tell us a little bit about just kind of how it presents and how you first encountered it many years ago?
Sure. Yeah, I remember. The salvage part you're talking about is the floor. It's a maple floor, and it came from the old Jacksonville library. No, excuse me. Post office, thank you, which was torn down prior to 1938. And somehow they got the wood to do the floor. The inside of the building is tongue and groove cypress. The walls are, the ceiling is, it's a cathedral ceiling with open frame trusses. And I was a scout there when I was young. I walked into that building for the first time in the summer of 1974, and it was like, wow, this is really cool. So y-
And you came back as a scoutmaster. Your son also
I
was a
I
scout?
came back as a scout parent.
Okay.
My oldest son became a scout in 2008, and then they asked me to take over as scoutmaster somewhere around 2010, 2011. I'm not sure which year
Okay.
it was.
Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of current status of the building in terms of where it is, what repairs are needed, and why you all are undertaking this fundraising effort now?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the inside is absolutely glorious. It's stunning, and people don't expect it when they see the outside because the outside is sad. That's pretty bad. So it needs just about everything: siding, roofing, bathrooms. It's just fallen into disrepair over many years. But the troop is coming back. There are a lot of parents who've grown from a couple of kids, a low around COVID, up to many dozens of families now that are part of the programs, and so it's expanding. And I think part of the expansion is the joy of the building in part, but also the values that I think a lot of people are searching for in institutions and certainly with our youth.
And so you've undertaken, I mean, there was a fundraising effort that started a couple of years ago, wasn't
Um,
super successful.
right.
So
Right.
what is kickstarting this new initiative and like money wise, what's the goal?
Right. Well, the goal is $250,000 to be able to restore. Not we don't want to dramatically change it, other than fix up what's there. Obviously, we want to keep the glory of the inside and repair the outside so that it lasts for more generations. The original start was kind of, we needed a bit of money. We thought people would turn out, and we didn't do much about it. We're not fundraisers. And then this past year, we really took it on and said, we need to do this and we need to get the community involved. And that was stimulated in great part by having a lot of great people around who said, this is an amazing thing. We should really save this. And the Atlantic Beach City Commission, mayor, and a number of mayors in the area of Jacks Beach, and of course, Mayor Deegan, have all recognized the place publicly, and actually the city commission has as well. And that's the kind of thing that really got us stimulated and helped us move forward, and people being aware of it. Because when we have tens of thousands of people who've benefited from a scouting program in the
Yeah.
area, and so we're hoping that they come out. We're hoping that when they realize what we're trying to do, save a rare historic piece of Florida's legacy, that they'll contribute if they've had value from the program, and I think many of them have.
And so this event, it was last week, I guess it was
We,
5 mayors that were kind of
yes,
participating. Tell
yeah,
us about that.
shocking, yeah. Uh, that all very different, perspectives, but all agree on the values that we're trying to have. We're trying to help good kids become great kids is one of our slogans, and they came out in support of what we're doing, and have publicly expressed their desire to have this really go forward. And so they've done that by making donations, some of them themselves, by being part of this process, by getting us involved with Rotary and the Daughters of the American Revolution. And we've just got a lot of organizations that are coming, that are now beginning to really step up when they realized what was happening, including local businesses.
So, Frank, a lot of people will think this is like a Boy Scout troop facility, but this has been home to Cub Scouts and Brownies and Girl
Girl
Scouts.
Scouts,
It's kind of a equal opportunity scout.
explorers, adventure crews. Yes.
Yeah. And so it is not, I guess, a gendered facility. It is open to
Oh,
all that operate out
correct.
there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. The Boy Scouts now are open to boys and girls. So we
Sure.
have, through this guy and the current Scoutmaster, they have formed a new Girl Scout troop, which is Troop 9037.
Okay.
Um, so we feel pretty fortunate that way.
What are you able to I mean leverage in terms of, are there grants out there? Are there historic I mean, we've just been talking for this whole previous segment about
Dan has been working very hard on getting a grant from the state. Let me let
Tallahassee.
him.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're hoping if the governor's listening, that we're
He's a
hoping he.
big fan, I know.
I bet
So
that the current budget, the budget that's coming up for 26, there are a lot of historic preservation grants, And we met all the hurdles. We went through everything and passed the test of the Historic Commission to get a grant to help us do the outside in a historically appropriate way, which is what we'd like to do. And so we've got that, but the budget isn't clear whether there'll be a budget or not.
How
We'll know
much
that in
money
July.
would that
That would be
comprise?
140,000.
Okay.
Yeah,
And how far would that get you?
pretty far, pretty far. But we're still looking for a few, sound donors. We have a few that we think are quite interested. We're gonna have a huge bronze plaque recognizing how the community supported this process. To be honest, I'd rather have a lot of local people support it than one big grant. Yes, it's a lot easier to get one big grant, no question. But when you have local people supporting it, that's the longevity. That's the next generation. And I think that's what we want. We want people to recognize, wow, this is helping all of our kids be great kids. These are the leaders of tomorrow.
I can see that a place like this would have a lot of kind of memorabilia and,
Oh, yeah.
cool old pictures and stuff. Are you using any of that to, kind of create the story of this or assist in the fundraising at all? Are you making T-shirts and postcards and that kind of stuff?
Well, we haven't done that, but
That's
that's
a
a good
great
idea.
idea.
I can
There
join
is
your team.
You're on the team.
All right.
there is one picture. There's two pictures in there from like the first group of boys who were scouts, and one of the boys in there, is the father of my best man,
Huh.
Fred Coney Allen, and he was also a teacher at Fletcher Senior High School for probably 30 years. So yeah, there's some serious history.
Some
coming through
history.
there.
We've got an email from Elizabeth. She just says, as both a parent and a professor of education, I greatly appreciate, especially in this day and age when screens, technology, and social media have an ever increasing presence in our children's lives, that in Scouts, boys and girls connect with each other and the natural world around them in authentic ways. We're going to have to leave it there, but we will have a link to your efforts on our website. And we appreciate you both being here. Dan, Frank, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Up next, empowering women to prioritize.
AEG presents Hauser, the Rebel is Back tour. The Croatian cellist brings his blend of classical, pop, and rock music to the St. Augustine Amphitheater on Sunday, May 18th at 8 p.m. Information at theamp.com. Florida Eye Specialists and WJCT present Seeing the Future, game-changing innovations in early detection and transformative cataract surgery with Dr. Omar Ghayasadin at a free lunch and learn on May 9th. Registration at wjct.org/events. DuPont Counseling Group is a team of therapists, psychiatrists, and counselors available to help with life's mental health challenges. Everyone needs help sometimes. More information can be found at jacksonvillecounseling.org.
20 minutes of reading a day paves the way to success. Ask questions about the story and let your child predict what happens next. Engaging their imagination makes reading more enjoyable. For more information, readjax.org.
Let's play.
As the crack of the bat echoes across blooming fields, Film at WJCT Studios presents a heartwarming celebration of America's favorite pastime. April 30th, we're hosting a special screening of EFIS, a charming indie gem that captures the spirit of community, nostalgia, and the magic of the game. With humor and heart, EFIS is a tender tribute to the game, the people who play it, and the moments that make life meaningful. Visit WJCT.org/film for tickets.
If you're in the U.S. without legal status, the Trump administration says leave or else. We hear from one woman about how her life changed when she self-deported. Plus, President Trump promised a major immigration overhaul in his early days in office. 100 days in, where do things stand? That's next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in women, and the signs often go unnoticed. A First Coast advocacy group is working to change that. And here to tell us about it is Kate Mays. She's the 2025 First Coast Go Red for Women Summit chairperson. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning. How are you?
Great. We're also joined by Jackie Easterling. She's the Vice President of Development at the First Coast American Heart Association. Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning.
So we often think of heart disease as kind of an older person's illness, but we were talking just before this segment, and you noted that almost half of women age 20 and older are living with some form of heart disease. That's a really astonishing number because so few are aware that that's part of their life, I think, at that age.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that that's one of the things about the Go Red for Women movement that's so important is that we're able to share information and education around that staggering statistic. It's really scary.
And so is reaching out to younger women particularly important, or is it kind of creating awareness in older women when they might be at a stage where that heart disease is manifesting in a life-threatening way?
Yeah, I think the awareness really starts younger. I mean, I think, as we said, the stats are astonishing with how young it is with women over 20. But I think that's just a prime time with a lot of this research that we're doing. It's because women are starting their careers or starting to have families and they put their health priority behind. And so they're not, they're canceling their doctor appointments so they can do something else or take care of someone else. And so it's really building the awareness that they need to continue to know how to do, CPR. They need to know the signs. They need to have a lot of this awareness out there in the community. And it starts, as soon as possible.
I feel like there was a point at which, there were certain kinds of cancers that were not widely discussed. Women didn't often, pay attention to breast cancer. It wasn't really talked about much. Is this kind of in that category that it's just sort of it's going to take some time and some effort to build that awareness? Because I feel like women are very acutely aware of cancer risks.
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of publicity around cancer, specifically in women, in many communities. And so we at the American Heart Association are just trying to do our best to spread that awareness. With 1 in 3 women being impacted by heart disease and 1 in 5 impacted by stroke, when you hear that and you look around a room when you're sitting there, you're like, which one of us is it going to be? I mean, this is a real thing. And so really leaning into the Go Red for Women movement to spread that awareness specifically with women is so important. I would say that this is our 21st year celebrating this here on the First Coast. And so we are making headway, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
So, what is different about cardiovascular disease in women in terms of either how it develops, why perhaps we know less about it than we do for men?
I can share that women are less than 40% of women are part of the research. And so men are, women are just underutilized as far as research goes. The other thing that's really profound is that their symptoms appear differently. And so they can be masked or identified as some other symptom that's related to something else, like menopause or, just stress or anxiety. And sometimes it's just under diagnosed because when women say things, sometimes they're just disregarded. When they share what they're feeling, it's not that they immediately look at their heart or their cardiovascular system.
Right.
So,
And we often hear symptoms, are kind of, or see on television people kind of clutching their chest. But what are people, women, experiencing when they're starting to have a cardiac incident?
so what we hear is a lot of times you're feeling things in your neck and in your jaw or in your back. And so with men, it's really like you hear that people say, oh, it's like an elephant was sitting on my chest. It was a lot of pressure in the chest. And we have learned that sometimes it's a feeling that goes down the arm, that it's in the neck, it's in the jaw, and that, or it could be like even a gastro type of symptom. And so with that, it's very easy to just blow it off and say, I'll get to that later. I'll see if it continues. Traditionally women are just wearing that superhero cape and taking care of, like Kate said, everybody else. And so, really just kind of pushing down and double clicking on the fact that women need to prioritize their own health and know their symptoms and know when to call 911 or go to the hospital.
And it's not really just women that need to prioritize their health, right? I mean, you were mentioning that there is some research and some data that show women who are experiencing a cardiac event are less likely to get assistance from people in the outside world or to get CPR.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what the American Heart Association has done a great job of building awareness in the community about CPR and teaching. They've taught fun ways of teaching everybody to be able to give CPR, be able to do it to certain beats of music, just to train everyone to be able to help someone in need. But it's exactly that, what you mentioned. Females are less likely to receive CPR because of a multitude of reasons. People are scared that females are going to be embarrassed, or they're scared to touch them, or they're scared to, expose them or have anybody look at them, or to hurt them because they might be smaller. But this is something, building the awareness to be able to give CPR, but also to be able to receive and help someone that is in need is huge. I mean, all these things that we're talking about, females are more likely to have a stroke than a man. And so those are just something back to, your point of a stigma that you don't think it's going to happen to a female, or you don't think it's going to happen to younger females. It's something that we're really trying to build awareness here.
And so awareness is part of this upcoming event, this summit, which is on Friday. It's from 10 to 1:30. Can you just tell us who should participate and where they can get more information just briefly?
Sure. So they can go to the First Coast, Go Red for Women.org. You may have I want to make sure I have the right. They can go to
it's goredforwomen.org.
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
And then anyone can come. So this is open to men, women,
All right.
and people of all ages.
Thank you so much. We'll be back tomorrow.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. AEG presents Kenny G. The contemporary jazz artist will bring his smooth and soulful saxophone melodies to the Florida Theater on Wednesday, May 7th at 8 p.m. Tickets available at floridatheater.com.